today, but I'll get started. 37 epigrams of Marcus Argentarius are transmitted in the Greek Anthology, a large collection of short poetic compositions, predominantly in elegiacs, which range from the Archaic Age to the Byzantine period. It consists of two different anthologies, the Palatine Anthology, AP, and the Planudian Anthology. The former is transmitted by the manuscript Heidelbergensis Palatinus graecus 23, which is now kept in the Palatine Library in Heidelberg, plus the Parisinus Supplementum Graecum 384, now housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. It has been made up and copied by several scribes at different times around the 10th century, and contains roughly 3,600 epigrams, distributed into 14 thematic books. The second, the Planudian Anthology, which has been transmitted by the manuscript Venetus Marcianus Graecus Z 481, now in the Biblioteca Marciana in Venice, was compiled by the monk and scholar Maximus Planudes around the 14th century. It contains roughly 2,400 epigrams and 7 thematic books. Of these 2,400 epigrams, 388 are not in the previous anthology, in the Palatine Anthology. Both the Planudian Anthology and the Palatine Anthology can be traced back to the Anthology of Constans and Cephalas, now lost, 10th century AD, and are based on all the collections of epigrams, such as the Cycle of Agatias, the Galland of Meleager, and the Galland of Philip. Regarding Argentarius' identity, not much is known. He lived in Rome around the 1st century BC AD. He was probably a pupil of the famous rhetorician Cassius Pius, mentioned by Seneca the Elder in his Controversiae. He wrote some declamationes, now lost, as well as the aforementioned epigrams in Greek. Argentarius excelled in the composition of this literary genre, the epigrammatic genre, and privileged fictional epigrams covering different topics: love, death, burial, banquet, and characters, sailors, courtesans, and different figures from the demi-monde especially, characterized by humor, irony, wordplay, and witty punchlines. The outcome of my research for this 3-year full-time PhD will be the critical edition of Marcus Argentarius' entire epigrammatic corpus, consisting in a translation and commentary in English. It will be preceded by a copy introduction discussing also his biography, his language, meter, style of his poetry, his place in the epigrammatic tradition, his engagement with the literature, as well as his impact on Latin poets. As a representative example of my way of proceeding, I have selected an epigram, AP5.16, which I believe showcases well his technique, typical themes, and stylistic preferences. In today's talk, in the interest of time, I will not discuss all the lines of the and the words of the poem as I do in my commentary, but will focus on those which are the most interesting for the conference topic and present significant textual issues. So first of all, an introduction on the content topic. In a dark night, with the moon only partially visible, Chrysokeros, line 1, reflects the shape of the moon when it's not full. The desperate speaker calls on the celestial elements, as he has not heard from Ariste for days. He declares his certainty that he will get her back by unleashing Cupid's silver tracker Hans, a metaphor for money, which the girl is attracted to. In the initial apostrophe, Argentarius addresses the moon and the stars as his supporters, playing on the idea that they witness lovers' nightly affairs and assuming for this reason that they may know the girl's whereabouts or a possible involvement with other men. Indeed, Mene had herself been in love with Endymion and was known in antiquity to sympathize with those suffering the same pain. Starting from the apostrophe to the moon and the stars in the first couplet, the poet focuses on his abandonment by Ariste and his inability to find her, line 3 and 4, which is the core message of the entire poem. It then includes once more the celestial elements in the final couplet. They will hunt together, line 5, the Tessomen, but the speaker will take the initiative, line 5 again, epipemso. In the first half of the text, Argentarius evokes natural elements to elicit their sympathy for his plight in a grave, solemn, and serious atmosphere. To better reach this effect, in line 3, he makes use of two verbs typical of funerary epigrams, which, as they are placed in such a dramatic setting, seem to suggest the death of Ariste, whereas the girl has merely left, as we soon find out. Leipo and its compounds are indeed technical markers of the deceased person's departure from life, While oikomai is often used in a euphemistic sense, like tenesco, Argentarius is clearly playing here with different types of epigram, the funerary and erotic epigrams, as well as with audience expectations. Similarly, udiunamai, a common clausula in verse ending in the Greek Anthology, may have been placed in such a prominent position at the end of the fourth line, not only following epigrammatic tradition, but also to emphasize the speaker's inability to find ariste, which, as I said, is the key element of the poem. Nevertheless, all this disappears in the last couplet. Such a desperate initial situation is indeed followed by a sort of deflation, with a shift from the figure of Artemis, presented indirectly as goddess of the moon, line 1, and of course as the best Ariste, line 3, to Aphrodite, line 6, Cupridos. Given that Ariste is one of the attributes of Artemis, and Artemis was known in antiquity as the goddess of both the moon and the hunt, the proper name of the girl, line 3, could be both backward-looking, line 1, mene chrysocheron, so the reference to the moon, and forward-looking, line 6, Cupridos ikneutas argyreus sculacas, a reference to the hunt. The last line in particular has a jarring effect, combining Cupris and the hunt Artemis, who stand for opposite matters in antiquity, hunt, moon, and chastity the first, love, pleasure, and passion the latter. Hence, Ariste, instead of being the best among women, eventually turns out to be committed to Aphrodite's sphere of activity as a hetera, and easily won back through money or gifts of silver. Line 5, Argyreus Sculacas, for instance. This punchline comes as an approxdoketon, subverting audience expectations. What before seemed as an issue requiring even the mention of the celestial elements in the speaker's plea, it is now not so hard to overcome. Argentarius plays not only on different types of epigrams, as I've shown, but also on the use of proper names. Ariste is an epithet for Artemis, virgin goddess of the moon, but is here applied to a courtesan, thus implying a sexual rather than a moral superiority. In this regard, it might be seen as an inappropriate name, using McCartney's classification of puns on proper names, implying that the character of the person named is the diametrical opposite of the idea expressed by that name. The girl, instead of behaving exemplarily, has abandoned a lover and rendered him desperate. Besides the last couplet, further evidence of Ariste's financial state is the word magos, which, line 4. With this term, Argentarius implies that the hetera Ariste has bewitched him with her hearts, and then has worked a disappearance trick. As Dubner notes, the word magos could be used for a hetera who, with tempting promises, keeps the lover in her power like a witch. Prostitutes, in fact, were believed in antiquity to be expert in trapping men by performing erotic spells, and the initial mention of the moon and the stars would lend some support to the metaphorical reference to witchcraft here, since these elements are often well connected in the Greco-Roman literature. But passing on to the second, more technical part of my talk, I have put the text in the tiny reproduction on the bottom of the page on the right, so for you to follow better. In the first line, PL transmits directio derke, whereas P as derkei. Ecker in 1843 amended the manuscript's readings into derkeu, a Ionic poetic second singular imperative. This correction, although tempting, is unnecessary in my opinion, since the transmitted derke, which I print, yields good sense. For such apostrophes to gods in the second singular indicative, one may compare Euripides' Testimonium 93 Cannicht, as well as Euripides' Hippolytus and Hercules Furens. In the case of the following, Purilampeis asteres, I print the nominative asteres instead of the accusative transmitted by P for syntactic reasons. Ecker once more amended perilampei, transmitted by P, into perilampeis, meaning astraque circum lunam fulgent. However, the usual function of peri in compounds is not spatial, around, but rather emphatic. For instance, perilampes means very brilliant and not brilliant around. Besides, perilampeis is less forceful and more prosaic than the alternative purilampeis, and is transmitted by a manuscript, P, which does not transmit always the most reliable readings for this epigram. Conversely, PL does it. Just As an example, line 1, derke, transmitted by PL, line 2, asteres, line 3, me, line 5, and line 6, sculacus. On the whole, as Sider points out, P is a more reliable manuscript, but Planudes, with access to other sources and with some common sense of his own, often offers the true reading. Gao and Page take even a harder line, arguing that an editor must always prefer PL's text to P's, while Cameron admits that P is a hardly reliable guide. In any case, the corruption pure into per, a more common and known first element in compounds, is not without parallels. It occurs also in Apollonides, as well as in Nicander Teriaca 40. A final argument in favor of puri is the well-attested motive comparing erotic passion to fire, the flamma moris, implied by it, pure meaning fire. The stars are bright like fire, like the passion that Erastes is experiencing. In the third line, I print muropnos, as you can see on the PowerPoint. This is a poetic term which is here used in its uncontracted form and in alliteration with the preceding memonon. The muron in antiquity was a sweet perfumed oil used in symposia, where unguents and scents were traditionally present and often associated with tere, like ariste, as means of seduction. Muropnos frequently occurs in Meleager and epigrams. In particular, it is attributed to the beloved's hair and skin, respectively, in AP 5.175 and 5.197. Which Argentarius surely had in mind while composing this epigram. For all these reasons, it is preferable to read muropnos here instead of muripnos, transmitted by PL, although I know this is a lectio difficilior. In fact, the less common muripnos in the epigrammatic tradition is only attested in Macedonius and in Palladas, which are completely different contexts from what we have here. In the case of Auten Zetesomen, line 5, the manuscript reading should be preferred for the following reasons. Firstly, zetein can mean seek to find, pursue, as in Xenophon, Cynegeticus, as well as in Sophocles. Secondly, belonging to the same semantic family, the noun zetesis means hunt, and the derived adjective deus zetetos, for instance, hard to seek or to track. Thirdly, the idea suggested by the Thesoman that the object of one's erotic desire is like a prey to be pursued is widespread in antiquity, and in Marcus Argentarius it further appears in two other epigrams. Fourthly, the emendations by Brunk, agreusomen, meaning to catch, Stadmüller, tereusomen, meaning to chase, and of course, Des Rousseau's emendation, zogresomen, to take captive, are paleographically very distant from what transmitted by P and PL, although I might say Des Rousseau's emendation is the least invasive and would give adequate sense, but it's not necessary, in my opinion, in the presence of the authority of both manuscripts agreeing on the same lectio. Therefore, I believe that an interpretation of the emistage, such as "we will seek to find her," proposed by Pezzoculos, would fit the context by combining the theme of the hunt recurrent in the entire epigram and the poet's intention to get the girl. Following up, N as the contracted form transmitted by PL for Ean, and not the feminine relative pronoun transmitted by P, plus epipenso, and the consequent reconstruction of the line as if I send implied something else, epipenso, after my previous failed attempts is preferable. Indeed, line 4, Eureinten magon or dunamai, implies that the poet has presumably already tried to find Ariste in different ways, namely by going to her house, by sending her other gifts, but had no success. As last resource, he comes up with a plan. He will send further, or in addition, campaign, something new for her, this time Cupris silver hands. Jacob's emendation of N, transmitted by PL into R, is not necessary, since the manuscripts already provide two valid possibilities. Gao and Page, whose opinion I share, also label as unstylish Stadmüller's rearticulation of the text, separating AP from the verb and taking it with N transmitted by P, so the relative pronoun, in an apostrophe. However, their suggestion, enide penso, is not a happy one. Indeed, by taking into consideration penso instead of epipenso, the logical connection with the earlier part of the epigram, namely the previous failed attempts of the poet, would be lost. Regarding the last line, the reading transmitted by PL is preferred over Callimachus, transmitted by P, for contextual and semantic reasons. Since the last couplet employs the theme of the hunt, line 5, zetesomen for instance, and given the presence of ikneutas, dogs which hunt by scent, Calux, meaning seed vessel, cup, seems unlikely. The poet is planning to send Aphrodite, specifically the Jura, Argueus Gyulaces, could mean silver coins or gifts, namely unspecified silver items, sent as bait in order to attract the girl, or with which the girl, if she's actually hetera, is paid. In this case, Argueus is likely a double pun. First, a pun on the Homeric epithet for dogs, Argos, which was the name of Odysseus' hunting dog as well. Secondly, a pun on Argentarius' own name, since the Greek word for silver, Argyros, is in the poet's name, thus creating a bilingual pun based on the idea that one's name reflects an important characteristic of one's personality, the logic of nomen omen. If he uses silver, which is embedded in his name, he will succeed in finding the girl. Furthermore, as Maxwell Stewart points out, the track dogs are appropriate to Artemis rather than to Aphrodite, because she, not the latter, is the huntress. Although we know that the goddess of love too appears often with quiver and arrows, traditionally attributes of Eros, in literary as well as iconographic tradition for the popular theme of love as hunt. But the connection between Artemis and these dogs is confirmed by Augustan Roman coins in silvers, denarii, which depict the hounds of Artemis, the Roman counterpart, Diana, as you can see in the tiny reproduction on the bottom of the screen there. They are taken from the catalogue of coins of the Roman Empire in the British Museum. Hence, the silver track dogs sent over by the poet may be considered as actual denarii, with Diana's hounds on them. In addition to the poet's proper name, Argueus Argentarius, a more complex bilingual pun on metals may be used by and may be suggested by the presence of cupridos, a line 6 of the epigram, given that cuprum in Latin means copper. On this assumption, Argentarius would make Diana's coins, so some denarii with her hands on them, Venus' weapons to get back Ariste for sex. Maybe also by paying her a substantial amount of coins, since she is the best Ariste in the job. And a prosdoketon, given that Artemis is the virgin goddess par excellence. To sum up, the first part of my talk has been dedicated to a preliminary presentation of the author and the general content of AP5.16. Successfully, starting from what transmitted by the manuscript PNPL, I have shown how to get to the Constitutio Textus step by step. Through the discussion of the textual issues posed by the poem, I have tried to reconstruct its sense by unraveling, as if in a riddle, the etymological wordplays and the relevant themes recurring in it. Thanks to this way of proceeding, it has been possible, ultimately, to discern a second, more profound level of interpretation, which is corroborated by the framing structure cleverly displayed by the three couplets. Here are some bibliographical references in case you are interested, or you could always drop me a line, and I would be more than happy to discuss on these aspects with you in the Q&A session later. Thank you very much for your attention.